2019 has been a great year for movies. I ended up seeing 101 movies from this year, and I enjoyed almost all of them and want to talk about them. So I'm doing something similar to what I did in October for my 31 Days of Horror review, and reviewing every single movie from 2019 that I saw in 1 minute or less, not counting clips from the movie. There are some movies I had to go over 1 minute for because there was just too much to say about them. You can find the list in the Letterboxd link in the description, as well as timestamps for each movie. I don't expect anyone to actually watch every review, so you can easily pick and choose which reviews you want to see. I put asterisks beside the reviews I personally would like you to see, however, either because I really would like to recommend the movie, or because it was so bad that I need to share it with the world. Despite seeing 101 movies from 2019, I still wasn't able to see every movie that I want to see, but I had to draw a line somewhere. I went to the Toronto International Film Festival this year, so I will also be talking about those movies, even though some of them won't get full releases until 2020. I'll be breaking this list down into parts, and I'll be releasing parts as I finish them, which at this rate might be in 2021. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the movies of 2019, ranked from worst to best. Whew. Putting the controversial premise aside, Loqueesha is not a good movie on any technical level. The acting sucks, and the ADR is ridiculously bad.
Glad to see you're working so hard, Joe.
I got a smartphone.
But you said you hated smartphones.
I was wrong.
That's not to mention how bizarre and muddled the plot is. At one point, there's a subplot where the main character is going insane, and it's resolved in the most weird way possible.
I am Loqueesha, officer!
Not only does this movie have an offensive premise, but aside from a few moments, it's not funny enough on a consistent basis to really recommend as a so bad it's good movie. I do find Jeremy Saville, the director and lead actor, to be fascinating in the same way as Tommy Wiseau and Neil Breen. I think he knew that the premise was a bit outrageous, and that would get people to watch the movie for all the wrong reasons, but I don't think he really understands why it's so offensive. At one point, the main character is actually called out for what he does, with a very valid criticism, but the conflict is just brushed aside almost immediately.
You lied. You pretended to be somebody else. You tricked me. You think all black women sound like that? Yo, what up? How you doing? You're a racist and a misogynist. Why'd you have to make us sound so stupid?
You know, I might be a fake and a phony, but I am the most authentic one you will ever meet.
I know, Joe. I didn't even care that you pretended to be somebody else. I know who you are. And I
love you.
That's what I was gonna say.
Great. I got nothing left to talk about.
Matthew McConaughey stars as a
hooker who can't afford hooks
in what has to be one of the most bafflingly bad major motion pictures to hit the big screen. I'm not going to spoil the big twist, if you could even call it that, since it's pretty obvious from the beginning and is revealed early on, but I will say that the writing in this movie is a thing to behold. I'm not even sure what else to say about this movie. Like Loqueesha, I'm not even sure if I should recommend it on a so bad it's good level, because other than the ludicrous script and some hammy performances from McConaughey and Hathaway, it is a well-made movie, which in a way makes it all the more bizarre. If you're willing to have a bit of a laugh and not take it seriously, you might enjoy it, but don't really expect something like The Room or Troll 2, because it isn't really a laugh-a-minute kind of movie. This is the reason why weeaboos shouldn't be allowed to make movies. She's Just a Shadow is a film set in Japan with Japanese actors, but it is made by a white American man, and the dialogue is in forced English, resulting in some hilariously bad line delivery.
Would you rather be really fucking high or sober when you die?
High.
Me too.
So, why don't you guys just stay drunk or high all the time? Because we're gonna die either way.
That wants to be a model and wound up being a prostitute.
Man might go out and rob someone or kill someone. We do this. This is better. We make people feel good for a living.
It's so exploitative. It's basically Japsploitation. That's not to mention the excess amount of nudity. I know it's supposed to take place in a brothel, but come on. Large sections of the movie basically dissolve into softcore porn. It's like a horny 14-year-old who watched too many Takashi Miike movies made it. That being said, it's surprisingly well shot and features a lot of visual flair and style. Some of the plot and character ideas are actually kind of interesting, but everything is executed so terribly and the writing is just horrendous. The dialogue sounds like it was badly translated, with some pseudo-film noir philosophizing bullshit thrown in.
with the mask on. I can break any rule. say anything. With the mask off, those rules will break me.
I'm glad I watched it, but I can't really recommend it, even as a so bad it's good movie, because it's pretty long, it's almost 2 hours, and it drags at points. I'm honestly baffled by this movie. I don't know what to say.
Hey, mister. Mister.
I'm getting real fucking tired of your pity. And fuck your dog!
I'm so glad I waited for this to come out on Netflix instead of seeing this in theaters, but either way, it was a total waste of time and a disappointment. The 1989 movie isn't quite a classic, but it is an effective and fondly remembered horror movie that does a good job at adapting one of the best Stephen King novels. It is quite dated though and could have actually made for a good remake. This book is all about processing grief and the inevitability of death. And while these themes are successfully portrayed in the 1989 movie, they are only touched upon in passing in the remake. Pet Sematary is one of the few King novels that actually has a great ending, and it's more or less faithfully adapted in the 89 movie. The ending of this movie, however, is completely different and absolutely terrible. I'm sure the writers thought that this ending was going to be more edgy and darker and scarier, but completely misses the point of the original. John Lithgow as Judd is the best thing about this movie. His performance was absolutely wasted here. The tragedy of the original novel only really came through when his character was on screen. Overall, this movie isn't overly terrible, but it's just plain and bland and kind of boring. Against My Cock is not a good movie, but with an IMDb rating of 2.5, I was expecting this thing to be absolutely terrible. But I honestly was genuinely entertained. I swear to God I don't have ADHD, but the atrociously fast and confusing editing in this movie is honestly very fun to watch. All of the scenes with writer/director/actor Mark Polis' character, a spy in a coma, wandering through different locales inside his head, are absolutely ridiculous and incredibly repetitive. There are so many shots of Mark Polis just rolling around in various locations. Meanwhile, in the real world, the FBI or CIA or whoever, I can't remember and I don't care enough to look it up, the spy organization wants to pull the plug on him to retain the intelligence that he has in his head, but his wife, played by Diana Argonne, is doing everything in her power to stop that from happening. While not exactly original, it's honestly an interesting idea and brings up interesting questions about who owns what is in their heads. Argonne actually does a solid job here, and I found her character to be compelling. Honestly, I don't think this movie was that bad, and I kind of admire the ambition behind this.
I do know that your vision is too cloudy these days.
2019 has blessed us with not one, but two movies that imitate the king of comedy. One of them was directed by the director of The Hangover, and the other was directed by the singer of Limp Bizkit, and stars John Travolta. We are truly living in the greatest timeline. I heard of this movie first through a friend who saw Chris Stuckman's Hilariosity on it.
I can't talk too long. I gotta poo.
I love this movie.
He made me promise that we would watch it together for one of my famous weird movie nights, and that I would even watch Stuckman's review so that I would be the Fanatic virgin when I saw it. John Travolta gave this performance his all. He went full Nicolas Cage for this movie. I'm honestly starting to wonder if Face Off was a documentary, and Travolta and Cage have been trolling us by pretending to be the other person ever since then. In which case I can say, I loved Travolta and Mandy. In all seriousness though, I honestly kind of respect the dedication he put into making this terrible script worth sitting through. For the first 80 minutes of the movie, I thought, you know, this isn't too bad of a movie. It's not good. There's some weirdly unnecessary voiceover from a peripheral character that doesn't make any sense.
But Moose, he's unbreakable.
But, you know, it's still a movie, it's coherent, you can understand character motivations, even though some of them go way over the top.
I got your autograph. Right? Is my autograph.
But then, the ending happened. Oh my god. What a gloriously messy, rushed, and nonsensical ending. Me and my friends could not stop laughing. I mean, really, what the fuck? I don't think I'm even going to be able to fill a minute with this one because I can barely remember it. It is a fun little action thriller heist movie that's good to watch on Netflix with the family when you can't find any other movies that everyone is willing to watch, which is how I ended up watching it. It is an enjoyable movie with a lot of action, and I found the rather absurd obstacles that the characters had to face in the second act to be really fun. Really not much more to say about this one, it's fine I guess. Moving on. Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile is extremely okay. Shockingly unshocking, and probably worth a watch, I guess. Zac Efron as Ted Bundy is pretty great casting. He really sells the role as a charming and handsome serial killer. My main issue with the film is Bundy's girlfriend. I felt that that character and her relationship with Bundy weren't as fleshed out as they should have been, especially given that this movie is described as being from her perspective and is based on her memoir. Parts of the movie follow Bundy on his own as well, so that perspective isn't even there all of the time. The film doesn't really glorify Bundy, but does kind of focus on how charming he is, to the point that he comes off as this quirky, fun-loving dude that you just love to watch. I get that this is probably the point, since we're supposed to be in the POV of people that admire him or love him, but I kept waiting for the movie to take on a darker tone, but it never really does. This movie is not good, but at least it wasn't boring. I guess this movie is a bit of a guilty pleasure because it really is the most try-hard, edgy bullshit I've ever seen. It's basically a John Wick ripoff that inserts sex scenes that border on being porn, dark comedy that prioritizes being random and edgy, and editing for people with ADHD. At least the cinematography was good, and it looks sharp, and Matt's performance is really fun and basically saves the movie. If you're gonna watch it for Mads. This movie didn't really do much for me, and I found it kind of boring overall. The gator carnage is intense, and there are some suspenseful sequences in here, but I didn't find the characters that compelling. I felt like the whole backstory was forced in there as an afterthought, and whenever there was a scene touching on that, I kept waiting for them to bring back the gators. The characters don't make any stupid or infuriating decisions, so that's a plus. It's not a bad movie by any means, and it's just under 90 minutes. If you were already interested in seeing it based on the premise, don't let this review stop you. You might enjoy it. It just didn't do much for me personally, and I found it ultimately kind of forgettable. I was almost not going to bother with this movie because I didn't hear great things about it, but the premise sounded interesting, so I decided to give it a chance. I still think the premise had potential, but unfortunately the execution of the film was subpar and forgettable. The movie could have explored so many interesting themes, but it only kind of brushes over them in favor of getting to the next plot point or gory scene, which were, I will admit, pretty well done and probably the best parts of the movie. The origin story for the evil super kid in Brightburn is pretty much identical to that of Superman, right down to the state in which his adoptive parents reside. This setup could have led to an interesting comparison of parenting ideals in the 1950s world of Superman to our 2019 world, and it could have led to an exploration of nature versus nurture, and it could have went deeper into how the parents were feeling, but it just didn't, and it became an overall stale and forgettable movie as a result. The first Iron Sky movie was about a colony of Nazis that escaped to the moon in 1945, but came to invade Earth in the not-too-distant future. It had interesting characters, and while some of the politics were heavy-handed at times, it was a fun and enjoyable B-movie with a simple plot that was wrapped up neatly. After seeing the first movie, I wasn't really sure where exactly they could take the story. So what The Coming Race does is take us far into the future and drops a ton of exposition explaining that Hitler and a bunch of other prominent historical figures were actually aliens that came to Earth in the dinosaur age and inhabit the Hollow Earth. The whole premise is absolutely insane, but given that this is a B-movie, it's actually kind of admirable and charming that the writer and director found a way to create a universe where endless stories can now be explored. While The Coming Race is a better made movie than its predecessor, I didn't find any of the characters to be interesting or fun this time around, and I thought that perhaps the plot was a bit too complicated for its own good. I wouldn't really recommend either movie, but I don't regret watching them, and if a third one comes out, I'll probably give it a watch. Scary stories to tell in the dark does a pretty good job at bringing the illustrations from the books that haunted me and many others as a kid her life. Every time one of the stories was adapted in this movie, it was genuinely scary, in a way that I didn't expect to see in a movie aimed at such a young audience. I have to applaud the movie for that. There are real consequences. I mean, we actually have a body count in this movie. The majority of the runtime was used to develop the framing story, which I really could have done without. I would have very much preferred if they just made this a straight anthology without any framing device, and either adapt more of the stories or flesh out the ones that they want to adapt a bit more, because the stories themselves are usually only a page or two long, and they're kind of designed to be easily memorized folktales so that they could be, you know, told in the dark. What we got instead isn't bad, but kind of boring and drags a bit. Just warning you right now, this review is going to be over 1 minute. I can honestly make a 15-minute long video on Cats. I am not joking. As a kid, I was absolutely obsessed with the 1998 filmed version of the musical which my family had on VHS. I watched the shit out of that tape. I even brought it to school once when I was in the 3rd grade or something and somehow convinced the teacher to allow me to show it to the class. And everyone absolutely tore it to shreds and said it was weird and scary and dumb, and the teacher stopped playing it after around 15 minutes. Seeing the reviews for the new Cats movie kind of gave me numb flashbacks to that time in the classroom. Cats is a fucking weird musical, and that is kind of why I love it. A lot of the complaints about the movie are things that were adapted from the musical. Yes, I know the proportions don't make sense. Yes, I know it doesn't have a plot, and it's just a bunch of different cat characters introducing themselves. Yes, I know the cats are fucking horny. Yes, it's fucking weird. But it's supposed to be. It's Cats. The music, dancing, costumes, and set designs all have elements of surrealism, and the combined effect is to fill you with childlike wonder and joy, and yes, fear. I'm not gonna lie, Cats both fascinated me and scared the shit out of me as a child. I cried from fear when I saw it live the first time. So the question is, does Cats the movie succeed in capturing the spirit and weirdness of the musical? The answer to that is yes, kind of. I honestly really respect how genuine this movie is. It goes all in with the weirdness, and you can tell that was made by people that really love the musical, and that everyone had a great time making it. Idris Elba really hams it up here, and he is really fun to watch. Rebel Wilson and James Corden, on the other hand, kind of suck the genuine fun out by replacing it with dumb jokes. I also thought that the new song was just okay and didn't really sound like a cat song. Finally, the elephant in the room must be addressed. The character designs and visual effects are horrendous. I mean, ew, why? Oh my god, the horror! I think they were trying to evoke the look of the musical, but if that was the case, why not just put them in fucking costumes? Why do a horrible hack job CGIing them when it worked with costumes in the musical? Honestly, the shit quality of the visual effects makes it an unintentionally must-see movie. All of you so-called film critics out there who didn't like this movie just didn't get it. I'm kind of glad that I read the reviews before actually watching this movie, because considering that this is a movie starring Jake Gyllenhaal and is directed by the same director as Nightcrawler, one might have expected greatness. It's not that great though. It's a satire about the art world that thinks it's smarter than it actually is, that later turns into a supernatural horror movie about a haunted piece of art. I surprisingly found the dialogue-heavy first half to be more entertaining than the horror half, although it was kind of fun to see these unlikable characters get their comeuppance. I would consider this movie to be a bit of a guilty pleasure, and it's an ambitious failure that I can respect for not being afraid to get a little bit weird. Oh man, I'm just gonna let director Noah Hawley say it himself.
Backstage, John Hamm said, "Congratulations on the release of your last movie." You know, we work just as hard on the bad ones as we work on the good ones. And we don't know until they come out, like, which one is it? But I feel pretty good, and we'll see what you all think.
He definitely knew that this movie wasn't very good. Between the obnoxious and distracting aspect ratio changes, and the jarring tonal shift at the end where the movie suddenly becomes a girl power buddy road trip movie, despite the fact that this is where the movie should have taken a darker tone, some very questionable choices were made. The thing most people are going to be talking about though are the ridiculous aspect ratio changes, which are supposed to represent how Portman's character is feeling, but a lot of the time they don't make any sense. They kind of just happen willy-nilly in the first third of the movie, before being largely dropped for the rest of the film. I feel like Hawley, whose work on television has been quite good, tried his best but ultimately failed to elevate a really bad script, creating a movie that is neither bad nor good, but watchable, thanks mostly to Natalie Portman's performance. Braid is the debut film from Mitzi, and it is quite weird. It's a psychological thriller starring an all-female cast about two drug dealers on the run, staying in their insane friend's house and going along with her crazy games. There's a lot of twists and turns in this movie, and nothing really makes a lick of sense until the very end when everything comes together. This movie definitely has the feel of a first-time indie filmmaker being behind it, and it's definitely not a really great or impactful movie, but it's well-paced, well-shot, and does not overstay its welcome with an 82-minute runtime. Yesterday. It's your typical struggling musician goes from rags to riches story with all the cliches that come with it, like the struggle to remain modest, the straining of relationships due to touring and fame, and trying to maintain artistic integrity in a world where art is largely treated as a product. What makes Yesterday worth watching though is that it throws in an added element of stress on the protagonist by having him exploit the fact that he is the only person on Earth that remembers that the Beatles exist, allowing him to pass off their work as his own. Danny Boyle gives us a relatable protagonist in an unrelatable situation. And as a viewer, what would you do? On a whole though, Yesterday is more of a fun, charming movie than anything that really challenges the audience. And the protagonist comes up with a solution at the end that ties everything up in an almost too neat bow. My main complaint with the movie is that the romantic subplot is pretty boring and cookie cutter, and almost seems less believable than the premise that the songs of the Beatles would be a big hit today. Given the reviews for this, I was expecting it to be very experimental, but was pleasantly surprised to find that, hey, this thing actually has a plot, at least until around the hour mark. Paris Is Us is about a young woman named Anna, who is in a volatile relationship with a young man named Greg, who keeps on telling her that she has no ambitions.
Le seul problème que t'as, c'est juste que j'ai pas de thunes, c'est juste que c'est ça le problème.
Non, justement, le problème c'est pas que t'as pas de thunes, c'est que t'as pas d'ambition.
As I mentioned earlier, at one point during the movie, the film's narrative kind of falls away, and reality is brought into question as the main character faces an existential crisis. The movie was funded with Kickstarter and was shot in Paris during some recent social-political tensions, tragedies, and demonstrations. I have no clue what this movie is really about, but it's possible that the main character is supposed to be a personification of the city of Paris itself, which is supported a bit by the title. It does have some pacing problems, and at times the main relationship feels a bit forced, and their arguments are a bit repetitive, but I enjoyed the movie and found it pretty impressive for a Kickstarter project. Not sure what else to say about this one other than that it's just kind of boring and forgettable. Adam Driver does a good enough job, and his character's passion and anger is basically the closest thing to a pulse that this movie has. The subject of the movie is both interesting and uninteresting. It's about the US government torturing people and covering it up, but most of the movie deals specifically with the writing of this report, and then the attempt to get out there while being challenged by a bureaucracy and people who don't want to get out, which is kind of a boring thing to make a whole movie about. I don't think this movie is really gonna expose or reveal any new information that most people don't already know. It's not a bad movie, but it's not one I would ever want to watch again. Yeah. Steven Soderbergh is such a strange director because he is very much a chameleon, changing his style to suit whatever it is he is doing. His movies are hit and miss, and The Laundromat is somewhere in the middle. I have not seen The Big Short, so I can't really comment on the complaint that it is a Big Short wannabe. Anyways, I tried watching this with my mom, and she was bored of her mind, but I actually rather enjoyed it more than I expected to, and found it both educational and entertaining, with reliably good performances from Gary Oldman, Antonio Banderas, and Meryl Streep. It's essentially an anthology movie about the Panama Papers, with some lectures about money from Oldman and Banderas linking them. The fourth wall breaks didn't always work, and I have some mixed feelings about the ending. Despite how preachy it got sometimes, I had a good time with it, but given the reviews, your mileage may vary. So Steven Soderbergh actually made 2 movies this year, very cool, but unfortunately both of them were kind of, not that great in my opinion and kind of forgettable. High Flying Bird is a movie about the politics of sports, and for someone who is not that into watching sports unless there is some kind of bandwagon to get on, I'm certainly not that interested in the lawyer-y side of it. That being said, there are definitely a lot of people who are interested in that and enjoy the movie. It is also kind of interesting to see an often unrepresented aspect of the sports world brought to the screen. The movie was shot on an iPhone, and it definitely is a great accomplishment on a technical level. Overall though, the film doesn't have that much going for it, and if you aren't already familiar with the sporting world, it's kind of hard to follow. I honestly can't remember what the plot exactly was, and I only watched the movie about a week ago. It kind of looks and feels like an extended episode of Suits, but without the over-the-top entertaining characters, which makes it kind of dull overall. If the premise looks interesting to you, by all means give it a watch. It's definitely not a bad movie by any means, it just wasn't for me. I never thought I would see a movie have a title that was basically clickbait, but here we are. Episode 9 is entertaining, but heartless. This movie is so fucking pandering with all the fan service and references. Jar Jar Abrams completely retcons everything set up by The Last Jedi here and basically throws a bunch of shit that came out of nowhere at the wall and hopes that sticks. Palpatine is back. He was behind everything from the beginning, apparently. It would have been real nice if that was built up at all or hinted at in the new series, but no. So Rey has to go find a MacGuffin, a knife that leads to another MacGuffin, a green pyramid called a Sith Wayfinder, in order to find the planet where Palpatine is, so she could kill him, I guess. You can't make this shit up. You know, good thing they only made 2 Sith Wayfinders so that Kylo can find one at the beginning and Rey can find one in the middle of the movie. Really fucking convenient that they made a second one. The whole plot was basically pulled out of JJ's ass last minute. It would have been an okay plot if it was set up from the beginning, but it's not.
JJ, what was the bigger challenge? Starting this trilogy or wrapping it up?
Not starting it. Wrapping it up for sure. Because it's 9 movies and the responsibility is much greater, and you know, starting something isn't necessarily easy, but it's far easier because you know the possibilities of what happens.
Another thing that annoyed me about this movie is that there were absolutely no stakes or consequences throughout. The stakes that were there were incredibly forced vegetarian imitation stakes, and they copped out of a lot of the consequences. There were no risks taken here. Instead of doing something with her character, Rose had less than 10 lines. They really pussyfooted around The Last Jedi here. Say what you will about that movie, but at least it did something different. This movie is just Return of the Jedi all over again. Weapons with planet-destroying capabilities show up again? How many fucking times do we need to establish the same threat? Even though I spent this entire review complaining, I still enjoyed the film for the spectacle of it. The music is basically a Pavlovian trigger for me to enjoy myself no matter how bad the movie is. I'm just really glad to be done with this series, to be honest. I already talked about the perfection in my 31 Days of Horror video. I'll link that video with the time code to that part in the description, so if you want to hear my opinions on it, check that out. After being pleasantly surprised with the first movie, I had some pretty high expectations for the nearly 3-hour-long sequel, and I was left rather disappointed. This movie is a bit of a mess that is way too long and extremely repetitive in the structure of the scares, but thoroughly entertaining despite that. A large portion of the middle of the movie consisted of the adult characters having a flashback to a time that Pennywise scared them as a child, only for Pennywise to scare them again in a very similar way as an adult. I think the filmmakers tried too hard to replicate the first movie, so they brought back the child actors, gave them a bunch of scenes, and then tried to replicate the humor of the first movie, which ended up giving it a much lighter tone overall than the first movie, when really this should have been the darker and more hopeless chapter. That being said, the casting and performances from all the adult losers was on point, and I found these characters really believable, fleshed out, and adapted extremely well from the book. And the stellar visual effects made Pennywise just as scary as ever. Wounds is the second feature film from Babak Anbari, who previously directed Under the Shadow in 2016, which was well liked by many, including myself. Wounds, however, yikes. The movie stars Armie Hammer, who is a millennial bartender, who is the type of person to say
fucking millennials
when referring to a bunch of Gen Zers. He is not the most likable guy. His life changes when he comes across a cell phone and gets weird messages, creepy pictures and videos about a ritual involving the translation of wounds and yada yada yada. It's very complicated and most of it isn't really resolved, but there are hints here and there that there is a demon or something that is looking for a vessel, and it shows the main character because he's supposedly empty inside. The movie doesn't take itself too seriously though, and for the most part it's a fun horror thriller with some interesting body horror thrown in. To quote David Albert's review, it's possible that it doesn't take itself seriously enough, as it never really fully explores the themes it sets up. That of an evil cell phone is not only kind of inherently silly, but cell phones are so familiar to us that it's quite a leap to get into Lovecraftian territory from there. And while I admire and appreciate the effort, I don't think it worked here. Not really sure what to make of this movie. It's a movie about Haitian voodoo that treats the subject very ethically and respectfully. It's more of a voodoo drama than a horror movie, until the end where it kind of does become a horror movie. I really loved the ending and thought everything before that was interesting and all, but I don't even know what to say. It was kind of boring and it felt a bit pointless. At parts, I was really getting into it, but then at other parts, I wasn't. But overall, I liked it. But I wish I liked it more. Fuck, this review isn't making any sense. To give you a bit of a feel of what this movie is like, in the beginning when it introduces its present-day characters, it shows them being lectured to about history and shit, but the lecture just kept going on, and I began to realize that the filmmaker was expecting the audience to pay close attention to this lecture, but I got kind of lost because I was not expecting to attend a lecture when I watch a movie. Bottom line, it's a very strange movie, and I am interested in checking out the director's other movies and may possibly revisit it. Major True Detective Season 2 vibes from this movie, and not just because of Vince Vaughn. Like in True Detective 2, the dialogue in this movie is very writerly and pretentious.
There's a certain stridency at work here.
Oh, frankly, I'm apoplectic.
I'm feeling a little apoplectic myself.
And should I infer from your reticence that this is one of those times you can't talk about your work?
Please, infer by my reticence.
Nobody talks this way. In writer-director S. Craig Zahler's previous movie, Bone Tomahawk, the dialogue was also very writerly, but it kind of worked in that movie due to the Western setting where unusual dialogue could be expected. I'm pretty sure the dialogue is supposed to be weird because it's a bit like a neo-noir, and I don't think it was meant to be taken 100% seriously, but I still found it kind of annoying and a bit more unintentionally funny than intentionally funny. For the first 90 minutes of the movie, I was really bored because it was mostly just dialogue between characters that I found completely uninteresting. The movie also tries to be edgy a lot, given that its protagonists are corrupt, arguably racist cops, but it feels like it values getting a reaction out of people more than anything else, and all it had me doing was rolling my eyes. All of that being said, I really did enjoy the last hour of the movie where the plot actually starts. I loved how it was basically a slow, arguably anticlimactic heist/shootout scene that consistently subverted my expectations on how it would play out.